to him because the neighborhood was poor and without defenses. The week before, he had been advised to discontinue the practice. On this day, the committee found that nothing had changed. Such was the report to the group that Saturday morning. It was discussed and then decided that his business should be boycotted and picketed and forced to close. The roster was set up, and the first group went to begin the picket vigil. One man in his comment from the floor said as they left, "We do not wish him any harm particularly, but he must be forced to feel what it is like to be victimized and to be defenseless." What is important for the mystic is that the purpose of the shock treatment is to hold before the offender a mirror that registers an image of himself that reflects the image of those who suffer at his hands. The total function of such action is to tear men from any alignments that prevent them from putting themselves in the other person's place. But it must never be forgotten that the central concern of the mystic is to seek to remove anything that prevents the individual from free and easy access to his own altar stair that is in his own heart. Therefore, social action, from my point of view, is never for such a person an end in itself. Finally, when all possible methods of social action have been exhausted without any appreciable relief or change in a given condition, and then what does one do? I must select what seems to me to be the critical moment when my maximum sacrifice will make my ultimate contribution to the relief of human need and human suffering. And you know, I don't think that any of us ever know what we will do under such circumstances. If I may do what I'm going to do anyway, in 1947, I went down, I was invited down for commencement at the State College in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. I traveled by train, and my train was late. And when I got to Pine Bluff, no, not Pine, some city, I don't know. What's Hot Springs? What is this city, the big city in Little Rock, excuse me. Yeah, that's what when I got to Little Rock, the connecting train had left. So I called the college, which was at Pine Bluff, telling them that I was there and the train had gone. So he said, well, in an hour or two, someone will be to pick you up. So I waited, and two young men came in this car, and we got in for the drive over to Pine Bluff. We rode the entire distance, and not a word was spoken. They said nothing to each other. They said nothing to me. I said nothing to them and nothing to myself. When we arrived at the campus, I noticed that even though it was 2 o'clock in the morning, all the lights were out on the campus. There were no, even the lights on the sidewalks, everything. The campus was dark. As we turned into the campus, we'd been driving about 3 minutes when in front of the car, in front of the headlights, stood a man with a rifle. And he came over and identified us, and we were passed on. And a little further along, someone else did this, and finally, we came to a place I didn't know. We were in front of a house because it's very dark, and the young man said, "This is where you get out, you're spending the night here with this family." And he helped me out with my bags, and I rang the doorbell, and it was the home of a young lady who had lived with us when we were living in Washington at Howard University. And when she saw me, she fell on my neck and began to weep. And she said, "Oh, Poppy," that's what she called me, "you made it." And when she began crying, I said to myself, "Oh, my goodness. I've been riding all day and all night, and now they're having family troubles. And I've got to sit up all night now and hear their story, and I've got to preach tomorrow morning." But I noticed there was no light in the living room. And so we walked through the darkened hallway into a center room where there was light, and here was her husband seated by a window with a rifle. And then they told me a very tragic story. They said that a few days before, a blind man, had been killed in the police station. And there was a great deal of unrest in the city. And the policeman who was responsible had been discharged, and feeling was very high. And he had gone out with the threat that he would organize a group and come out and destroy the college. The mayor had suggested that the president of the college perhaps should postpone commencement until this thing passed over. But he didn't. He stayed. And that night, Saturday night, the night that allegedly they were coming, all the men who lived on campus armed themselves to wait for the coming of the mob. My host said, "This is the second long night of our vigil. You have been riding all day and part of the night, so suppose you take a shower and take a nap for a couple of hours, and then you relieve me." Now, I had not had my hands on a rifle since I was a boy with a .22. And so I showered, took a nap, and then at the proper time I was awakened, and I sat at the window with this shotgun, waiting. And in that interval, I had one of the most amazing experiences of a long lifetime. All of my commitment, all the ups and downs of my own journey, trying to find a way to affirm the positive and creative meaning of life and the highest dimensions of clean human relations. I went back to 1922 when I was a boy in college, and I joined the FOR and walked all the way through the years. And I said, here I am now. What am I going to do? I didn't know. After I admitted that, I was able to think about it. I had two choices as I saw it. One, if they turned the corner coming towards this house, I could wait and take my time, and as they drew near and opened fire, I would return the fire until I fell. That was one option. The other option was, if they came, to turn the porch light on, leave the rifle at the window, and walk out on the porch in the light. When I settled these two alternatives, I was at rest. I didn't know which one I would do, but they didn't come. The ultimate logic, and I'm almost through now, the ultimate logic of social action, the ultimate, every word is crucial, please. The ultimate logic of social action may be some form of martyrdom. It is of great importance to be clear at a crucial point in a consideration of this kind. The sacrifice of one's life is the primary demand that the individual may make upon himself. No one else can make it for him. It is for his own sake that he must bear this kind of ultimate witness, if it is his choice. Here is not an exercise in futility, nor is it relevant that the situation demands this of himself. No, it is what must be done at long last to save his own soul and keep free and easy access to his own altar in his own heart. What it says essentially is this: on behalf of the human condition with which I have identified, I have done all I know and feel to do to help them remove the things and conditions that prevent their having free access to their own altars. I must find a way to overcome what may at first glance seem to be a sickness and an arrogance, but it is to let my own life become an act of redemption, not of anybody else's soul, but my own act of redemption for my own soul. The broad supposition here is that the binding unity among all men must be preserved and contained. There is a unity that binds all living things into a single whole. This unity is sensed in many ways. Sometimes when walking alone in the woods, far off from all the traffic which makes up the daily experience, a stillness settles in the mind. Nothing stirs. The imprisoned self seems to slip outside its boundaries, and the ebb and flow of life is keenly felt. One becomes a part of a single rhythm, a single pulse. Sometimes there is a moment of complete and utter identity with the pain of a loved one. All the intensity and anguish are deeply felt. One enters through a single door of suffering into the misery of the whole human race, with no margin left to mark the place one calls one's own. What is felt belongs nowhere, but is everywhere, binding and holding in a tight circle of agony until all of life is gathered into a single, timeless gasp. There are other moments when one becomes aware of the thrust of a tingling joy that rises deep within until it bursts forth in radiating happiness that bathes all of life in its glory and its warmth. Pain, sorrow, grief are seen as joy becoming that is good. There is nothing new nor old, only the knowledge that what comes as the flooding inside of love binds all living things into a single whole. The felt reverence spreads and deepens until to live and to love are to do one thing. And yet, there always remains the hard core of the self, blending and withdrawing, giving and pulling back, accepting and rejoicing, yielding and unyielding. What may be this but the pulsing of the unity that binds all living things in a single whole, the God of life extending himself in the manifold glories of his creation. There must be free access to his own altar available to all. Therefore, any denial of this possibility and opportunity for others cannot be tolerated. When I have exhausted all other means for aiding in the achievement of such a goal, the last and ultimate effort available to the human spirit is the discovery that there are some things in life that are worse than death. In fine, what I'm saying in this total discussion is that the mystic seeks ways by which he may find his way to that central core in himself, where the great God himself dwells, where in Eckhart's language the uncreated element, the givenness of God, is to be found. This is resident in all men, and indeed I'm persuaded in all living things. It is at this altar that he gets the clue to making his total life resonant with the holy sound. More and more the total life comes under the influence and control of that central music. What the mystic discovers for himself must be true for all men, good and bad, saint and sinner alike. As the mystic looks out upon the world, he sees there are obvious elements in the social condition that keep men and women from the sense of presence within themselves. A way has to be found to restore and discover self-worth, authentic identity, the chief manifestations of which is a consciousness of the indwelling presence of which the mystic speaks. The call to social action, therefore, must never be an end in itself, but rather a means by which the individual sufferer may get access to his own altar. And this, after all, is the only thing that matters, that God may come to himself in his creation, a time when God will be all and in all.